The Florida Gators are shifting more of their attention to the 2025 recruiting cycle. We're going to talk about that here today on Locked On Gators.
You are Locked On Gators, your daily podcast on the Florida Gators. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Locked On Gators, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thanks for making Locked On Gators your first listen of the day every day. We are available daily and free wherever you listen to the podcast and on YouTube. Happy Friday. I'm Brandon Olsen. Find me on Twitter at WNS_Brandon. Find all my written work with Giants Country NFL 33. Today's episode of Locked On Gators is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code Locked On for $20 off your first purchase. Now here, 2 days in a row, is Brian Smith. Joining me now for Locked On Gators for second day in a row, second time this week, is Brian Smith, Locked On's recruiting insider. Yesterday we talked 2024. Today we're talking 2025. Before we do that, I want to remind you that LinkedIn is the college recruiting sponsor across the Locked On Podcast Network. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find qualified candidates that you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnCollege. Terms and conditions apply. And Brian, as we're getting into the mix now of 2025 kids taking visits every week and Florida, you landed a couple of 2025 kids in the past couple of weeks. We spoke about them last week when you were here. But today, or this weekend, they have about 20 more visitors coming onto campus. What's your opinion just looking at this list? What stands out to you?
Probably the diversity. You and I talked about that off air. New Jersey, kids from Georgia and everywhere else. Florida State has always been able to recruit nationally. They'll pluck a kid from California here or there or the DC area. But I think Mike Norvell and his staff they're using their connections. And they've got Mississippi and Tennessee and all these places they have connections to, because some of them were with him at Memphis, et cetera. And it's a little bit different approach than what you may have seen with Bobby Bowden in the mid-'90s, but they morphed into this towards the end of his tenure too. So I'm curious how many of these kids come in and like it, and it's probably more important I'm talking about Spurrier, talking about all these different kids coming in and getting these players all over the place. It's not the norm for a school like Florida, but to be honest with you, it's the norm in college football now. So you and I have to adapt to it probably more than anything else. And I don't know, maybe I'm overlooking it, but when you have a state like Florida and you're the predominant state institution, you just think, there's going to be 80% kids from the in-state. It's not. Florida State, Miami, Georgia, Georgia even, as good as they've been, they recruit predominantly out of state. So I'm kind of seeing, okay, which one of these kids after the visit, they really like going on the road. It's okay to go away from home, because some of the kids will probably kind of cross out like, okay, that's too far for me. That's what I'm curious about most of all.
Yeah, and I did want to talk about a couple of players there. Like off air, we talked about offensive lineman Tavares Dice, who his offer sheet, first off, according to
it's ridiculous.
Yeah, we'll see. But his offer sheet it is insane. It's all SEC schools. Like, he's getting recruited by the elite of the elite. How do you feel about him as a potential 2025 player?
He has a very high ceiling. Could be a left tackle, could be a right tackle. For those of you who don't know, Langston Hughes on the south side of Atlanta probably has as much, if not more, talent over the last 3 years than any other school in the country. Ohio State got their quarterback out of that school last year in Aaron Noland. They've got kids at Auburn, at Georgia, all over the place, Georgia Tech, Alabama. That's as good as it gets. So his daily practice is more important to him than his games. Like, I've been to their practices. It's insane. So I would imagine if they could get him, that's a kid that could play very early. And you and I have talked about a couple of times that Florida might need some offensive linemen in this class, just maybe. Especially a plug-and-play guy. He's a possibility for that. Need to see how he develops between now and the end of this next year. It's still O-line. It's a developmental position. But he's, again, coveted by Auburn, coveted by Georgia, coveted by Alabama. That's a very good sign. So If Florida could pluck him out of Atlanta, that would be a coup.
Yeah, I did want to ask about him too, because he's 6'6", 275 is what he's listed as. And so size-wise, like he's there. He's pretty solid there. But looking at 2025 and potentially being a player there, how important for an offensive lineman developmentally is this last jump from junior year to senior year, and then senior year to being a college freshman?
There's a long way to go because, like you said, 275 is good size, but in the SEC, that's undersized. He's going to need another 25, 30 pounds, which should probably come the next year. I assume he'll enroll early. Next spring, he goes through the weight program at Florida or Georgia or whatever. He's going to look totally different by April 15th compared to what he was like when he enrolled on January 15th. That's just part of, becoming a man too. I also expect him to take another jump technically because he's going to be going to Under Armour camps, rivals camps, and all these things. These kids want to win, man. It's one thing to push around kids on Friday nights that are not as big as you. It's different when it's elite against elite. So we'll see if he can make another step. And it's O-line is technical aspects that other positions you can get away with. Not so much there you can get exposed. So he's got a ways to go. Could he play as a freshman at a place like Florida? Yes. Florida needs O-linemen desperately. Why couldn't he?
Yeah, that is an understatement. Like, just I just want to throw that one out there. Absolute understatement that Florida needs someone to play early. And given his, like we've talked about him athletically, I'm assuming pretty damn good. Tavares Dice is he someone that you think long term is better suited to that left tackle spot? Where again, I know that also right now in football, it's just like you need two good tackles. It doesn't necessarily matter just with how
it's not as
crazy edge rushers are. Yeah, with how crazy edge rushers are, you need two good tackles. But that left tackle spot is still going to be coveted. And like you mentioned, Florida desperately needs offensive linemen. You're looking at 2025 as a year where we're probably saying, okay, DJ Lagway, hopefully going to be the guy at that point in time. And we saw him play behind a horrible offensive line at Willis. Hopefully he doesn't have to do that again at Florida. But it is Tavares Dice someone who you think can be the answer, especially how do you think he would work with someone like Fletcher Westphal? Like, do you look at them both as they could both play left or right, whatever it may be?
Well, it depends on how much you want to run the ball. Like UF is probably going to be a little more run heavy than some other major programs in the Power Four. But at the same time, 3rd and 8 is still 3rd and 8. Westphal, you try him at left tackle. You try every guy at left tackle. If they surprise you, it's a bonus, brother. You know what I mean? But I'm going to say I would like to have Westphal at right tackle if I could. But I know that one of the first things they're going to do is tell him to get him in a 2-point stance and kick step to his left when he gets on camp. They have to. So part of that isn't who's better for it. It's he's a year ahead. So any kid they bring in, it's going to be advantageous for Fletcher because he's been through the system, assuming it's the same staff for year 2. But that's another story all to itself. We talk about that often, but it's just the elephant in the room. And part of this recruiting is to keep your staff there. You've got to hit the home run between now and July 1st with recruiting because that's part of the program's headed in the right direction. Getting somebody like Dice is a big part of that. Does it help to say we got somebody to protect DJ Lagway's backside? Yeah. I would think that it would probably make DJ's father very happy too. I'm going to go out on a limb and speak for the man. So yeah, they may end up playing one or the other spots, but if I had to push, I would say Fletcher ends up playing right, Dice playing left.
Today's episode of Locked On Gators is brought to you by Game Time. Game Time is the fast and easy way to buy tickets for all the sports, music, comedy, and theater events near you. And right now, users get $100 off when they buy a big game ticket with code Vegas100. And I mean, with Game Time, you get last-minute tickets, which I went to the Florida-Arkansas game. I bought the tickets like 3 days before the game on Game Time. So I did that. And one of my favorite things about the app is that you can see your view from your seat before you buy. So like last year, I bought tickets to watch the Mets play, and I got to see where my seats were. I like sitting close. I don't want anything obstructing my view even a little bit. I like to see the whole field, which is why when I went to the Florida and Arkansas game, second row in the end zone, but made sure that there was nothing in my way because I got to be able to see everything. If I'm spending money to go, I'm getting damn good seats and I'm going, right? Take the guesswork out of buying with Game Time. And right now, all Game Time users get $100 off a big game ticket with code Vegas100. Terms do apply. Just download the Game Time app. Use code Vegas100, VEGAS 100 for $100 off a big game ticket. Or you can use code Locked On for $20 off your first purchase. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest prices guaranteed. And then Florida also is already getting started. Like it's weird because last week we were talking about Florida's 2025 class, and we spoke about how, they've got 3 commits. It's a solid start right now to the class where a lot of teams have 1 or 2. But Florida is also already targeting kids that are already committed elsewhere. Namely, you have tight end Elias Williams, who is committed to Georgia right now on campus this weekend. How hard is that to kind of flip a kid where right now you're 11 months out? So is it that you have 11 months to pursue them and that you can really go, or is it kind of really difficult to convince a kid that was willing to commit so early in the process to kind of change his decision?
With this one, it's a little bit different because it's in-state and it's Georgia. I don't think there's anything easy about that ever. If it was 2 years out, it would be hard. If it was 2 months out, it would be hard. It's Georgia. And I know Florida fans don't like hearing that, but that's the preeminent program right now in college football. And they just had a tight end that just ran roughshod over everybody over the last 3 years. Good luck flipping him.
Yeah, their backup tight end was just a second-round pick in the NFL draft in Darnell Washington, so a little tough. But there is another tight end that Florida's targeting in Gus Ritchie, which is a very different case, I think. But Gus Ritchie, 3-star tight end. I know that there was reports he was going to be on campus this weekend. He's not going to be on campus, but he is planning a visit to Florida. It's just a matter of actually working that out. Committed to NC State right now. I understand that it's easier to flip a kid from NC State than it is from Georgia. However, a North Carolina kid, does that make it quite a bit more difficult to kind of get him to turn his head a bit?
That's a distance deal. And that's why these visits are very, very important. The parents need to be as comfortable with this visit as the young man himself. Florida State, Miami, Georgia, everybody's going to recruit that kid. He's somebody that North Carolina went after hard. He's going to have all the options in the world. Now, does he really want to leave the greater triangle area around Duke, North Carolina State? Apparently, he's at least interested. He's told you that, yeah, you know what? I'm going to visit Florida. So now you got to find out. This is one of those guys you put in its own little category. Let's see what happens. He's a really good player. He can play flex or he can play inline. I don't know if it's going to be easy, though, because Florida's always gotten like 1 or 2 kids out of that area. You almost got Amaris last year. That area always sends kids down this way. It's not out of the question, but he's committed to a local school. That's rough. Like if he was committed to Virginia all the way up in Charlottesville, I would feel a lot better. But they're getting him on campus. That's all you can ask. This is step 1 of about a 5-part process. And eventually you want to get him on campus for the official. Then, of course, the last part's just, does the kid have an opportunity to go ahead and make that decision and finish it out? But this is step 1.
Yeah, and looking at Florida's own 2025 class, you've got 2 in-state kids committed in Jalen Wiggins, Waltez Clark, and then you've got the out-of-stater in Josiah Abdullah. So I asked you, how difficult is it for Florida to try and flip a kid to their program? But for Florida's side of things, how difficult is it going to be to maintain your own commitments who, again, committed this early in the process? At least 2 of them are in-state, so you got to figure easier to retain them than others. But with someone like Josiah Abdullah, who we've talked about as he's probably going to be a riser in the process. You look at his offer sheet, it's not a 3-star offer sheet. So looking at him and his offer sheet and him committing mid-January. How difficult is that to retain that commitment from an out-of-state kid, not just out of state, but also in the state of Georgia, someone we expect to be a riser, and what we expect to be a bit of a tumultuous season for the Florida Gators?
That is one of the more interesting questions because Florida kids are fickle. So Clark, although a good kid, goes to Plant. The other kid's from Tallahassee, ironically, which that has its own premise for being a difficult recruitment for the Gators or anybody else. But you also have to look at it like, again, it's State U, man. A lot of kids want to make it happen there. They've got friends and family. No matter where I'm at in the state, there's always a Gators presence at every high school I visit, 7-on-7 tournament. You'll see parents walking around like somebody that's committed to a school, and their parent will have like a Florida shirt on. Their kid's not even committed there. It's not unusual. I don't know how this is going to go. They need to do well between now, like I said, in July 1st. And part of that's keeping those kids committed and helping their class get bigger. They got to keep those guys coming back for visits. I think Wiggins in particular is important because that dude can play for anybody. Miami's after him hard and several other schools. You need those kind of guys coming to your campus and doing it over and over. I think that will be a very much a litmus test for the Gators. How often for these junior day visits or anything, they have the barbecue at the end of the summer, whatever, are you getting the guys back on campus? Because if they're not, the writing will be on the wall. And you'll see more decommitments than you normally even do in this state, which it's the worst. This state is the worst for decommitments. It's not even close in the country. So I'm curious as well. And then, of course, kids from like Georgia, if UGA gets after a kid, it's hard. But Florida, I mean, they flipped Byro or whatever after he flipped Georgia back. I mean, we've seen all kinds of weird stuff with Florida recruiting in the last 12 months. They are about the weirdest school in the country to follow with recruiting. So I don't know if Billy has set up the payments for your psychiatry bills over there in New York, but he probably should help. I'm curious about it, though, because I know that some of the kids that are committed to Florida, like Wiggins, is going to get recruited by everybody. Yeah, I mean, and he's a defensive lineman that can play inside or outside and rush the passer. Okay, yeah, he's going to do whatever he wants, and there's not much Florida can do about it, but you got to get him back on campus. That's just an example. If they can get one or two more kids, especially if they can find a quarterback, which, DJ was the Pied Piper last year, it would behoove them to help that group stay together. But all you can do is just grind, man. They don't play a game until into August or whatever when they're, like August 31st against Miami. So
yes,
nothing else you can do. I mean, it's just grind.
Yeah, gonna be tough. Good thing Florida, last cycle didn't lose any blue chip defensive linemen or anything like that.
Oh boy,
good thing that they've got a great track record of retaining players. Not to be a jerk, I'm just saying I'm not counting the kid as signed until he signs. That's it. Commitment is fake. If you commit, you're a lean. That's what it is now. That's how I'm taking it. Today's episode of Locked On Gators is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, America's #1 sportsbook. And trust me, it is always a great time to get in on the action with FanDuel. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place a $5 bet. It's $150 in bonus bets, whether you win or lose. You can bet on really anything. The other day, their boost was Kawhi Leonard and Anthony Davis when the Lakers played the Clippers. Kawhi Leonard and Anthony Davis to both score in the first 3 minutes of the game. They scored within the first 2 minutes of the game. It was free money. The odds were like plus 270. It was pretty sick. The boosts are awesome. Probably my favorite part of the app right now. Just having a lot of fun with the sportsbook. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon. Make your first bet a layup. And remember that FanDuel is an official partner of the NFL. Before I let you go, I did want to ask more about Florida's targeting a lot of out-of-state kids, and I feel like most of the players that ended up flipping from Florida in the 2024 class were out-of-staters. I believe Isaiah Williams was the only one that ended up flipping that was an in-state player, and even then, that ended up being like he wanted to play with one of his high school teammates, so he went to Texas A&M, but you lost Amaris Williams, which... I mean, yeah, you lost Jamonta Waller, which guess what? Same school, also sucked. So that one also sucked. But when you have these out-of-state kids, how difficult is it to retain their commitments? Because I do feel like part of it comes down to you can't just take an unofficial every weekend to Florida. Like if you get a kid from Buchholz in Gainesville, like he could take unofficials to Florida every week, and it's great because he obviously he's not going to really turn his head that much if he's constantly there. You even look at someone from Tampa like that, and you can do that. But when you have a kid from, I don't know, Matt Zollers from Pennsylvania, he can't come to Gainesville every week.
I think, number one, you got to hit it out of the park on the visit. Two, the communication and the approach going into the visit, because every kid is different, needs to be magnified for that person. Let them know that, hey, you were really interested in our science program, or you really wanted to talk to Coach so-and-so about a certain aspect of our scheme. You answer those questions face-to-face, they'll remember it better than if it's on the phone. That's a big part of it. And then after that, it is on the phone. It is the communication. How consistent is it, and how valuable do they feel about your effort towards them? This is something that Urban told me long before he even became a head coach, talking about the communication and the consistency. Like when he was assistant at Notre Dame, I talked to him. He would tell me about that stuff, and he'd go in and get kids that they didn't even think they'd get an official visit with. He'd get them to go from like Texas to Notre Dame. They picked the coach, not the school, and that's where I learned that. And that's something Florida's going to have to do. They need a couple of the guys on their staff that are really good recruiters to continue to be, but a couple other guys, whoever it may be, and this is just open-ended, are going to have to up the ante because there's a lot of pressure on them. And every other week, some kid's going to read how Florida's coach is on the hot seat, and it's accurate. So you have to win those battles with personality, with the parents believing in you, and all that is communication. It's got to be A+. Like you said, a kid at Buchholz, he's 10 minutes from the swamp. He's probably on campus sometimes, and UF doesn't even know it. He's walking around with one of his friends that's a year older than him that's a freshman on campus. You can't do that if you live in Pittsburgh. You know what I mean? So Florida's visits this weekend are important, but right after, they need to feel like, after being a priority, that the communication is going to be consistent in their messaging, whether it's, the head coach is always involved, coordinators, whatever. They're probably going to have to accelerate it a little bit and just be top-notch from start to finish.
Yeah, and then one more question about it is just that Florida's coaching staff from all over the place.
It is.
And not just where they're born and raised, but where they went to college and where they coached before. You look at the additions they made this past cycle. You've got Ron Roberts from California. Will Harris is from California. Gerald Chapman is from Wisconsin. He's coached quite a few years in Louisiana. He coached in Cincinnati. He's been all over the place. How much does that play into recruiting that area? Because obviously it's easier for Will Harris, a California guy, to recruit a California DB specifically. But just how much of it is, I have a coach from my hometown, or I have a coach from my home state, like he kind of relates to me. How much does that go into the actual recruiting process for these kids?
I think it's a major part of it. A lot of times you'll hear that with Florida kids, especially because so many schools from up north, Illinois will get a kid, or it'll be Penn State or whatever. If you have somebody on your staff, it matters. At Penn State, they've got a coach that's their stud recruiter. He's from Fort Lauderdale. And I've asked a couple of the kids that either went to Penn State or at least strongly considered him. They said they could relate to him. He understood where we were from. So that matters. It resonates. So take Harris, for instance. If he's at UF for 3 years, what are the odds that he would not be able to get somebody from the Golden State? I'd imagine it's pretty low. That's, he's a good recruiter. He's a guy that has a reputation. He's a DB coach. I'd imagine he's going to get a few visits. I don't know who they're going to be. I don't know which guys he's going to target, but the track record is there, and he knows that state. So, and it's, again, I've said this a million times on this show, it's not hard to recruit the University of Florida. So, the location, the history at State U, they got national championships in their football office. It's not that rough. So if you can get 1 or 2 kids a year from like New Jersey and California to supplement your Georgia, Alabama, Florida group, like I was saying earlier, like Spurrier towards the end recruited a little bit more out of state, quarterbacks, etc. I mean, you know what? That's fine. If it's going to be a big-time player, that's fine. I still think most of the kids that are the upside guys and the pure athletes that play multiple spots, the state of Florida is famous for it. They'll probably stay local, maybe a South Georgia kid or something. But the elite kid from California, they're going to recruit him. So, again, they want to go the extra mile, put in that effort because they've got a guy like Harris that has a connection. That's cool. I think you should. So you recruit where you've got strengths, and Harris knows LA, et cetera.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things that Florida staff has actually done pretty well of having coaches that kind of have their markets like Joe Hamilton in Texas and Will Harris in California. I think they've done a pretty good job of that. It's just actually, retaining the guy. But thank you so much, Brian. This is Brian Smith, Locked On's recruiting insider. Catch him all throughout the Locked On College channel. Catch him on Locked On Gators. Apparently twice some weeks. We do that now. Love that. And catch him every day with Locked On Seminoles. Don't love that as much. But thank you so much, Brian.
Thank you very much. Take care.
Thanks again for making Locked On Gators your first listen of the day every day. We are available daily and free wherever you listen to podcasts and on YouTube. For Locked On Gators, I'm Brandon Olsen. Don't forget to follow me on Twitter at WNS_Brandon. Find all my written work with Giants Country NFL 33. And as always, I'll see you all next time.